Battle Force has introduced new ways to build armies in Star Wars Legion, something that I feel the game has needed for a long time. Now that they're here, you might be wondering how to use them best. A single episode on all the Battle Forces would be too long, so I've decided to give each Battle Force its own episode, starting with the Empire. This is Star Wars Legion Strategy Talk. My name is Endless. Let's learn how to play Blizzard Force.
Set your course for the Hoth system. General Veers, prepare your men.
In this episode, you'll learn what makes Blizzard Force such a competitive and fun battle force to play. I'll dive into some specific strategy and tactics advice, and I'll showcase 4 lists that you can steal or adapt for your own games. So what's the deal with battle forces? Battle forces restrict the types of units you can include in an army, and in exchange, you gain new command cards, a new force organization chart, and in the case of Blizzard Force, a new unit type. The rules for Blizzard Force are available through AMG's website and come in print and play versions, so you don't have to wait for the Battle Force box to play it. So I've got AMG's website open here. It's under Star Wars Legion Documents. You just click on Blizzard Force, and it gives you a PDF with all the rules. So what does Blizzard Force do exactly? Let's take a look at the rules and the cards here. The first thing I want to point out is that it introduces a new unit called the Heavy Response Stormtroopers unit. The Heavy Response Stormtrooper can take 2 heavy weapon troopers. These units are so strong that the maximum of 2 should be automatically included in every Blizzard Force list variation. 99% of the time, you're going to be running a DLT and an RT-97 for the range 4 attack. So that means you're going to need 2 Stormtrooper weapon packs in order to get 2 of the official RT-97 models. This unit punches way above its weight in points. I think you're only going to pay 74. The range 4 attack is 3 red, 3 white. Range 3 is 3 red, 6 white. So really strong attack. They hit like trucks. The biggest downside here is that they are Courage 1. So they're not going to be aiming a lot once they start taking suppression. The next biggest downside is that you lose a heavy weapon on your 3rd wound. There's only 3 generic Stormtroopers in this unit. Thankfully, the Heavy Response Stormtroopers are well supported by Imperial officers, Veers, even Vader with Compel. The next thing I want to point to is that Blizzard Force increases your support slot up to 4 support units, so you can take 4 E-Webs or 4 speeder bikes. I strongly recommend you take 4 speeder bikes in this slot. Bikes are highly mobile with a compulsory move. They can take aimed shots very easily. They surge to hit on offense, making them very consistent and indirectly benefit from each additional bike unit in the list. They're one of those threats that gets worse the more units you have of them. Their mobility and their consistency make them a strong flanker. They've got native impact 2, so that means they've got impact 8 across all 4 units of bikes. And they give you access to the bombing run objective, which is potentially very one-sided. They also play breakthrough really well if your bikes can live to the end. The biggest downside to bikes is that they are quite squishy and they should avoid being shot as much as possible, meaning you want to hold them out of range with orders like assault and use improvised orders to bounce it back into your order pool and go as late in the turn as possible and then go as early as possible in the following turn. The best way to keep bikes from being shot is to have another big threat in your list attacking at the same time, which we're going to see in the list that I'm outlining later in the video. I really don't recommend that you take 4 E-Webs or E-Webs at all, though someone out there could prove me wrong with the 4 suppressive E-Web list. I would love to see it. I actually think E-Webs are pretty awesome looking, so if you're out there and you want to do 4 E-Webs, let me know and comment below. Blizzard Force also introduces 3 new and very powerful command cards. So let's start with the 3-pip, Debark for Ground Assault. The obvious use of this card is to spur snowtroopers so they get their flamer attack more easily. You can also spur heavy response storms up to speed 3 with this card. It's useful for running with an objective or just getting them more involved in the battle if they've been left on a flank somewhere. The less obvious use is to take that suppressive keyword and use it on your heavy response storms to split fire, and you can put out 4 suppression per unit with a heavy weapon. I've heard of people playing Blizzard Force that are dealing like 10 to 12 suppression because they're taking a bunch of heavy weapons and splitting fire with that. Now, this trick can also be used on snows, so that's kind of how you get to that level of 10 to 12 suppression. Just don't expect to do a whole lot of damage with that splitting fire unless you're equipped with like frag grenades and flame troopers. Next we have Overwhelming Barrage. 4 black, beam 1, blast, suppressive, surge to hit. This is the best bombardment card in the game. strong enough to cripple most units that are caught by it. Make sure you have two targets at range 1, of course, and they have to be in vision of the unit that's firing this beam. It's generally best to play this off of your Imperial Officer or General Veer, since they can spotter themselves, take an aim action, and aim both of the attacks, the initial attack and the beam attack. Usually you play this on turn 1, you try to catch something in deployment. Maybe there's use for it in later turns to eliminate something injured, though, something to try. But yeah, usually you're just going to try to catch something when you deploy. Lastly, we have Unrelenting Fire, a 1-pip that can order 2 units of any type. If it was blank, it would still be excellent. The way to use this card is to watch the suppression level of enemy units if they're close to panic, or if they would be suppressed even if they rallied 1 suppression. That's the best window to play the card. An example of this would be a Courage 2 unit on 6 suppressions. It removes 1 at the end of the turn, then you play Unrelenting Fire at the top of the next turn. It can't lose more than 1 suppression, so it automatically panics. Hostile Environment is probably really good for this card, and it would be pretty favorable if you weren't running a bunch of Courage 1 troopers yourself. So how do I build lists with Blizzard Force? Before we get into that, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and check out all the links in the description. Should I include Darth Vader in my Blizzard Force list? Yes. However, there are also strong variants of Blizzard Force that don't include Vader that are worth a look. So why would you want Darth Vader in Blizzard Force? This is going to end up being a mini primer on Vader generally. Well, he strengthens your objective deck considerably. He adds the potentially one-sided hostage exchange objective, and Force Push has broad objective applications on key positions, intercept, payload, breakthrough, most objectives out there. Force Push is the least effective, in my opinion, on Bombing Run, which your bikes do incredibly well. Vader is also a big threat that has to be dealt with, supporting those squishy bikes. Do I want Commander Vader or Operative Vader? Well, both have distinct advantages. Commander Vader has an infinite courage bubble, meaning nothing around him can panic. He's got 3 force slots, enabling you to take Burst of Speed. And if you use Burst of Speed on the Implacable turn, he can move Speed 3 times, twice during his normal activation and once during the Implacable second activation. Saber Throw is great ranged pierce and anti-armor on Commander Vader. He can compel your Courage 1 troops. That's particularly valuable if your heavy storms are taking fire and you want to close in. As for Operative Vader, he's always Speed 2. He doesn't need Burst of Speed. He can take Force Choke, since he already has a ranged attack. Force Choke has huge objective potential. You can use Choke against people carrying boxes on Recover the Supplies, on the hostage carrier, on anything near a payload. It's about as broad of an application as Force Push. You can also use Vader's Force Throw, because it has the scatter keyword. You can reposition enemy miniatures that have been hit by the Force Throw into range 1 of Vader and choke them. So there's a lot of play there with Operative Vader's Force Choke. Operative Vader also has 2 training slots, so he can take Tenacity, which enhances his lightsaber and melee, and he can take Into the Fray, which gives him much needed defensive surges. Vader also has considerable downsides. He's a 200-point unit, meaning he's a quarter of your list. If he dies early, you're in trouble. Just about all of Vader's command cards are excellent, so it's really hard to decide what to keep and what to throw away. There are some really interesting combos between Vader's cards and Blizzard Force's cards. Master of Evil combined with Unrelenting Fire is a great example of Battle Force and regular command card working together, but it means you have to chuck out one of Vader's 1-pips, which is really tough to do. The same goes for the 3-pip slot with Debark for Ground Assault, Master of Evil, and Darkness Descends. You've got some hard choices to make there. Thankfully, you have an easy choice in the 2-pip level. New Ways to Motivate Them is only really used on multi-wound units like Dewbacks, and you can't even take Dewbacks in Blizzard Force, so I would just toss that out in favor of Overwhelming Barrage. Force users also generally want to be blue to utilize their tailored objective deck, so Vader is an expensive unit that also needs a bid to be his most effective. Now for non-Vader lists, is General Veers worth taking? No. You're better off spending the points on 1 to 2 Imperial officers instead. To be honest, Veers hasn't been worth it competitively for a while. I will say, though, that Imperial Discipline and Evasive Maneuvers are both solid command cards for Blizzard Force if you decide to include him in your list. I would still spend your points on 1 to 2 Imperial officers instead and include one with improvised orders if at all possible to help control your bikes. Now, we're going to look at 5 lists today. I think I said 4 at the top of the video. 3 of them feature Vader, 2 of them don't. All of them are legitimate. The lists featuring Vader have placed top 4 at very competitive events like Lone Star Open and the Hanover World Qualifier in Europe. The 2 non-Vader lists have not placed anywhere, but I can vouch for them since I've played them both. I try to play every list I showcase at least one time so I can really get a feel for it. We're going to start with Alex Gregory's top 4 list from the Lone Star Open in 2022. His top 4 game against David Hoffman is on this channel. Go check that out after this video. So here is Alex Gregory's list, and here's what I like about it. His Vader build is dialed in. He's got Vigilance, Force Push, Saber Throw, and Burst of Speed. He's got the Stormtroopers. He's got the 4 speeder bikes. The only thing I don't like is the Lone Flame Trooper. I think you can break this Lone Flame Trooper into a lot of really useful upgrades elsewhere. I don't know what one Flamer is going to do for you necessarily. Flamers are really good massed up. You've also got no improvised orders on your officers, so you don't get that extra measure of bike control. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, if you're going to play Vader, you have to make some hard choices regarding the command card selection. Now here is an updated version of Alex's list that I made and played recently. I put improvised order on the Imperial officer, and instead of a flame trooper, I took 4 emergency transponders on speeder bikes. Emergency transponder on speeder bikes is really good. It makes your bikes range 6 because you can double move and then aim shoot off the aim you get from the emergency transponder. Now, when I tested this list, I made a serious mistake playing Overwhelming Barrage on turn 1. Don't do what I did and play that card on turn 1. I nearly got my Vader killed because he didn't have defensive surge tokens from Darkness Descends. Okay, next up we've got Finn's list from the Hanover World Qualifier. Finn ended up taking Operative Vader and an Imperial officer with improvised and electric binoculars. His Operative Vader build is the optimal build that I mentioned: Force Push, Force Choke, Into the Fray, and Tenacity. He also takes the Heavy Storms and 3 bikes with Transponder. I'm pretty sure he left 1 Transponder off so that he could get a bit above 15 for that Force User plus Speeder Bike tailored objective deck that I mentioned. Now notice here that you save about 15 points on Operative Vader as opposed to Commander Vader, but you do lose out on Compel for your Courage 1 Troopers. Now, I don't have the exact deck that Alex or Finn used in their Vader lists, but this is what I came up with. You take Bombing Run because you have bikes, Hostage Exchange because you have Vader, Breakthrough because you have bikes, and if you're blue on Breakthrough, in general, the opponent has to come to you, so you're feeling pretty good about Vader, even if he's a little bit slow. And then Recover the Supplies. You've got 2 Naked Snows to carry boxes. You've got Force Choke for Vader to choke out their box carriers, potentially. So there's a lot of good play there. As far as deployments go, I think Battle Lines and Danger Close are pretty good for bikes since they're very horizontal deployments that you get a lot of room to flank. You've also got Major Offensive as a potential one where you can get some good flanking going. The 4th deployment, I like Disarray, believe it or not. Disarray with bikes is pretty great. You can get some really good angles with your maneuverability and find some good flanking shots. Hemmed In might also be good if you like to play aggressive with Vader. For conditions, you want clear, supply drop for Bactas, repairs, HQ uplinks in the deck. Minefield, your repulsor vehicles don't get punished by Minefield, and your snows are pretty sacrificial, so you can just sacrifice the snows to the mines if you really want to clear them. And then Hostile Environment, of course, for the reasons I mentioned with Vader's Master of Evil and Unrelenting Fire. You really want to avoid fortified positions because your bikes become less effective the more heavy cover there is on the board. All right, next up we've got an ATST variant of the list. Pretty much follows the same structure as the Vader list. It substitutes an ATST as your Anvil or Big Threat instead of Vader. Really leans into the range 4 and the Alpha Strike because you've got the ATST, the Heavy Storms hitting at range 4, and you've got 4 speeder bikes to come around and hit all at the same time. It's really that's really the core of how Blizzard Force plays. It leans into one big attack on turn 1 or 2. Here's what I like about the list. No Vader means you can take all the Battle Force cards with no conflicts. You can take Pin Down since throwing back tokens are very strong. Pin Down, if something gets hit by a bike, it has to return its face up token to the order pool. So that's obviously really strong because it gives you a little bit more of an edge in terms of order control. The ATST Mortar complements Suppressive, Overwhelming Barrage, and Debark for Ground Assault cards. I think Suppression is just a really underrated mechanic, and it's especially good now that Pikes are prevalent. Pikes are only Courage 2, and Blizzard Force can deal a lot of suppression, so much so that Pikes will panic, and even one panic during a competitive match can be doom for you. The ATST has Link Targeting Array as well, and spotter support from the Imperial officers mean it's going to be a monster when it's able to see over the opponent's cover. Plus, it'll always have orders because every command card is able to issue orders to the ATST. So LTA is a really, really good investment there. That's Link Targeting Array. It's got even more anti-armor. So it was Impact 8 with the 4 bikes. Now it's Impact 12 with the ATST and the Twin Light. So armor is not going to be an issue. And then 11 activations make bikes that much deadlier. Bikes really benefit from high activation counts. What I dislike about the ATST is that it comes with a host of its own problems, and the biggest one is having to maneuver to C. It's not very agile, it doesn't have reposition, it doesn't have pierce, it doesn't have high velocity. It's suffering a bit from early wave syndrome. It was the first heavy vehicle released along with the T-47 airspeeder. It got the elite armor pilot in the Gav, which you always want to take. I never recommend taking Weiss. I know a lot of people love Weiss. They love the 11 die shot, but I think the Hammers pilot is going to serve you a lot better in that regard. Of course, you got Naked Snows, which, they're not really a downside. They're great objective hands, but it kind of sucks that they have to be no flamers. The ATSD can melt surprisingly quickly. It does have 11 health, but it only has a white save, so you're possibly going to melt to dedicated anti-armor shooting. But the good news is they're shooting the ATST and not your bike, so you're meeting your goal of providing a threat that is not the bikes if they're shooting your ATST. And enemy force users can be a total pain to deal with if they get into your lines from where your ATST can't shoot. And you have to pay attention to what line of sight blockers your opponent gets from in your deployment, because if the opponent can hide a force user behind a line of sight blocker near your troopers, you're kind of in trouble if the ATSD can't get some sort of engagement on that force user before it closes in on your lines. And sometimes it helps to lead with the ATST in that case, because force users don't really want to engage the ATST. They want to engage your core troopers so they can hide in melee, and they can't do that if they're engaging a vehicle. So it's not a bad idea to just lead with your ATST. And the ATST has a melee attack. It's got 4 red dice with hit surge, so it's pretty consistent and reasonably threatening. Here is the command hand and the battle deck for the ATST list. I'm not going to go into too much depth other than to say we've added some vehicle-friendly objectives like payload and sabotage. We've also added the vehicle-friendly deployment like rollout, and the condition deck is pretty much the same. Now, this last list is for the truly dedicated Snowtrooper players, and one that will be easy to run if you buy the Battle Force box coming out in October. Here's a 12 activation, quad flamer, quad bike list. 20 Snowtroopers with grenades and recon intel are a healthy block of infantry. Every Snowtrooper is a deadly threat on its own because it has grenades and a flame trooper. You can still take 2 heavy response storms, even though you've got 4 units of flame troopers. It's a very high activation count that can really unlock objectives like payload and breakthrough, and bikes get even deadlier because you've now got 12 activations as opposed to 11. What I dislike the most about this list, it's got almost no answer to a force user once they get in, especially a dark side force user with force choke. You're just dead if they get in with you. And all the core are Courage 1. You've got no Compel or Infinite Courage Bubble to back them. You've only got the Inspire from your officers. And of course, you have to manage melee like Tauntauns or Wookiees by withdrawing or just out-activating your opponent. It has no real reply once melee units are stuck in. But I played this list and it was a total blast, even against Comms Jammer Tauntauns. See what I did there? Flame Troopers have blast. It was a total blast. Anyway, I recommend it. It's really fun to play. It's probably competitive too because it's got 12 activations. So Give it a shot. That's a wrap for Blizzard Force. If you got any value from this video, remember to like, subscribe, and check out the links in the description. If you have questions or would like me to cover a specific topic in a future episode, please comment below. And thanks to our patrons, Justin Rodriguez, JD Nielsen, Soren Pop, Patrick Hanshin, and CW. I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.